It's round two here with John Randine and Robin Black. One discussion, just not enough for this particular weekend. Moving off from the sale talks, we go back to a little event that went down over the weekend with UFC 200, the culmination of International Fight Week. Though I guess it extends to Wednesday as well in Sioux Falls. We'll discuss that at another time. But UFC 200, all three cards, John. I mean, what is the lasting impression if you were to isolate one particular performance or fight? What jumps out at you?
Well, I mean, it's hard to ignore what happened on Thursday night, especially if you're in Canada. Having Fight Network carry that main event to the 155-pound championship tilt between Rafael dos Anjos and Eddie Alvarez. We've had the great fortune of showcasing at Eddie Alvarez's career, so to speak, from his time in Bodog and Dream. So to get to see a guy that for years everybody's like, oh no, we know that this guy's good, but the UFC's just a different level, and there's some guys that can cut it on the local scene that they'll never be able to cut it in the big show, and it just proves that that's not necessarily the truth. And Eddie Alvarez, a guy that has always been involved in so many exciting fights, to see him realize his dream of becoming the UFC champion live here on FM is awesome.
He beat the UFC lightweight champion, and the guy beat before was a former champion and the last WEC champion. And Gil, the guy beat before that, was the last Strikeforce champion. He also has a win over the current Bellator champion. Eddie Alvarez, you're the best, man. That was pretty awesome. Doo Ho Choi, pretty spectacular stuff. But for me, I think Jose Aldo's performance was the most impressive to me. It was brilliantly done, brilliantly executed, and he came in there an entirely different fighter than he was the last time and that Frankie was prepared for. He was the prototypical pressure fighter. In the last few years, the coaches, many of the best coaches have been developing answers to the pressure fighter. Well, he came in and he was the opposite. He was inviting into the space. He was retreating and inviting and countering. It was beautiful.
I thought that was something that we looked upon. A number of the fights that we saw over the weekend was performers that, whether it was coming off a loss, big layoffs, a lot of pressure in these situations. Even Cain Velasquez,
who looked awesome.
First win since UFC 166. We're talking almost 3 years ago, last time he got his arm raised, and that's largely been due to injury and then the Verdum loss last year. But there was a lot riding on his fight. You saw other performances too, one like Johnny Hendricks, for instance, who did not have a great outing on Saturday night and taking a step back, having to reassess things. This was a major crossroads, I think, for a lot of guys, and Jose Aldo had a lot of questions coming into this fight, and I think he answered them.
Yeah, I mean, Jose Aldo looks sensational, and there you see Cain Velasquez. What I loved about this week is that you got to see real evolution. Now, we never saw that from Cain Velasquez before. You mentioned just seeing all these guys. You know, the spotlight was on this weekend. Everybody had to be on their A game. And there were a number of fighters that hadn't seen action in quite some time. Rafael Assunção, for example, hadn't been in the cage in a long time, and then he gets in there and has to face the former bantamweight champion who's coming off a split decision loss to Dominic Cruz. A tough assignment, and yes, he lost the fight, but he looked really, really good. He was very competitive. So I love that this UFC 200 meant a lot to a lot of fighters, and they showed it with their performances. Even, I know everybody's looking at Johnny Hendricks saying he didn't have the best performance. Kelvin Gastelum looked pretty good. A 24-year-old who was gunning after the former welterweight champion. And Johnny Hendricks, he took a lot of punishment in that fight too.
You know, Mark Hunt took a lot of punishment
Yes,
in his
he did,
fight
yes.
too. That Brock Lesnar, man, that, you know, we were advising you not to gamble. We probably advise you not to gamble a lot of the time because it's such a bizarre sport in so many ways. But Brock Lesnar on paper should not be able to just come in and run these guys. He's using an old school style for mixed martial arts, rip the guy to the ground and dominate him like that. And you know, wrestling itself, that movement right there, yes, you can get away from it, but he just has to get you down a couple times and beat you up. It was really spectacular. I was blown away by that guy.
Will Brock Lesnar fight again, John?
I mean, based on everything we saw from his performance, everything you said at the post-fight press conference, it feels like he really enjoys this experience and going in there and competing. He says, I was a bully growing up and this is my nature. And we've talked to many fighters that were former wrestlers, were back in the day. So we love competing, we love wrestling. But once we got to the ground, we wanted to do something else. And this honestly feels like exactly what Brock Lesnar was meant to do in life.
Yeah, and that's terrifying.
It is terrifying.
That is really terrifying. And, you know, for him to say he enjoys that, I know there are a lot of fighters who enjoy it, but not in the same way this ornery son of a bitch seems to, you know?
If you're the other side of the equation is the WWE, which ultimately I think that is going to
win.
They're going to be the decision makers. They win this time. Do they want to go through this again? Do they want to roll the dice? Because you look at what Brock makes. His disclosed purse was $2.5 million. He's not fighting some rank-and-file heavyweight. I don't think he would want those fights. So if he's to come back, you're talking about the Verdums and the Dos Santos, very well-rounded heavyweights with extremely dangerous striking. Does the WWE look at this like, hey, we gambled, we won here, that's it, we're out, we're cashing in our chips?
I mean, I can't imagine so because of who Brock Lesnar is. It's not just some guy who just fluked out a win over Mark Hunt and got a quick knockout. You see what he's capable of. You know, because of his genetic gifts, because of his wrestling background, because of his drive, you can understand how he would want to face the top guys. Can he compete with those? I mean, I think he can.
I'm sure he wants to. I'm sure the UFC wants to. I'm just saying that
how
the
much
WWE...
influence do they have? Because there are a lot of fighters, I think, in the UFC's heavyweight division where if the WWE say, okay, what about a guy like Stefan Struve, for example? It's like, okay, well, this is a guy that might not blow Brock Lesnar out of the water. It's a safer fight than a Junior Dos Santos or a Cain Velasquez or a rematch with Alistair.
Are you going to pay a guy $2.5 million to face Stefan Struve?
I think so. It doesn't matter. It's just like Ronda Rousey. It doesn't really matter who was standing across the cage from Ronda Rousey. People wanted to see her because she was the attraction, just like Kimbo. God, rest in peace, and now Brock Lesnar. It's really irrelevant who's standing across the cage.
Yeah, you know what? I do agree with you. He was worth every penny of that. And I'm a technique mark.
Of course.
And still, just the size and the power and the explosiveness. You have to watch him do this thing.
We got to race through this. Daniel Cormier defeats Anderson Silva. You could make a documentary out of the week that he had here. I couldn't believe the reaction from the audience here of what they anticipated here. And the fact that Daniel Cormier had no prep time, neither did Anderson Silva. He won this fight. I don't see why the negativity was such that night. But Daniel Cormier's performance, to me, that was the smart strategy, and he comes out with his arm raised.
I agree 100%. You have to remember, people witnessed Diego Sanchez and Joe Lozon, and they witnessed Cain Velasquez throwing spinning kicks, so they were anticipating excitement. We've seen what Daniel Cormier is capable of in the past. He's faced big wrestlers like Josh Barnett and Dan Henderson, and he was able to pick them up and slam them onto the ground. But as you mentioned, he was just dealing with so much emotion, dealing with uncertainty with Anderson Silva, and he's dealing with one of the most dangerous fighters to ever step foot inside of the cage. Just go in there, get the victory, and that's exactly what he did.
The funny part is that maybe the best outcome, he loses to Anderson Silva. That's the biggest match you can make at light heavyweight.
Sure.
You take John Jones out of the picture for now, that light heavyweight division, there's either Daniel Cormier's beaten, there's not a ton of depth there, and Anderson Silva getting that win, that creates a giant rematch.
Yeah, and he almost had the win as he kicked Daniel Cormier's body, and you saw the look on his face. He was visibly in pain. So, I mean, we all know what Anderson Silva's capable of.
Couple more pounds per square inch on that on that kick, and that fight is over. That's how dangerous these fights are, and he fought it perfectly. He fought it beautifully.
Let's chat about Amanda Nunes. She is the new women's bantamweight champion. I've already done a number of interviews on Monday, and people are discussing, did the UFC gamble here and lose with Amanda Nunes winning the title? Maybe not the most ideal scenario, but or not. Is this?
I mean, when you look at it, is Amanda Nunes going to be the athlete that's going to sell a whole bunch of pay-per-views? I would expect no, not right now, because not a whole lot of people knew who she was. Unless, if you were a fight fan, if you're deep into the mixed martial arts world, you know who Amanda Nunes is. But if you want to introduce her to the masses, you don't put her on pay-per-view and expect people to just take a gamble and pay. You have to do what we're seeing with other fighters. You have to put her on free TV. You have to get people used to seeing her. And if she can continue to do this against her opponents, eventually she'll end up being a pay-per-view commodity.
Everybody's got a story anyways.
Yeah.
There's a story for you regardless of who wins. And in Amanda Nunes' case, she's the first openly LGBT athlete to have a championship in the UFC. So there's always a story there.
Ronda Rousey's name came up a lot over the weekend. I mean, the return fights to me, it's just another name you can add to the list of possibilities. I think Ronda Rousey coming back for the title against Amanda Nunes, that does big as well, in addition to possible fights with Holm or Miesha Tate or even Cyborg. It seems that this division, look at it a year ago. We were getting set to watch Ronda Rousey and Betch Correia, and Ronda Rousey joining us and lecturing Robin why that was such a dangerous fight for her to take. This division doesn't reflect any of how it looked a year ago.
Yeah, and I mean, that's kind of what you need. You need freshness. You need a reason for people to tune in, because was it fun? Yeah, sure, Ronda Rousey was exciting to watch because of the way she finished fights, but you wanted some sort of competition, and now you've seen what's happening. There is competition, and I would expect that the rest of the division, since Ronda was ruling, that they're kind of on her level now, and I wouldn't be surprised if we saw rematches with Ronda Rousey and some of the fighters that she's faced in the past where they do a lot better than they did the first time.
I still think Holm is the special one in this list. Not only, she kicked Ronda Rousey and they had knocked her out, but Miesha Tate's heart just squeaked her, just got through to that one after 23, 24 minutes. And I think Holm is the one to watch.
But would you be surprised if Shevchenko defeated Holly Holm?
I would in this case. Shevchenko is an undersized bantamweight. Holm is a very big, strong bantamweight. Shevchenko comes forward and pressures forward with strikes. Holm is extremely good at manipulating space and countering you, almost what Frankie did, or what Jose did to Frankie. She's very good at that. I feel like Shevchenko is kind of a nice matchup for her.
As we kind of put to bed International Fight Week, anything that flew under the radar that maybe isn't getting discussed? I mean, we saw Will Brooks come in, get his first UFC victory. Joe Duffy, an incredible 25-second win over Mitch Clark. Diego Sanchez getting stopped by Joe Lozon, only the second time that Sanchez has been stopped in his career. Like, there was a lot, I think, in the days as you look back that, wow, that also happened on this card. I mean, Derek Lewis defeating Roy Nelson. There were just so many stories coming out of here, and so much focus is on the main card of 200 and the sale now, but we saw quite a lot over the last few days.
Yeah, I think for me on Saturday, we finished the show, and Gegard Mousasi, and anybody that's been watching mixed martial arts and outside of the UFC, they understand how good Gegard Mousasi is. He fought in Pride back in the day. This guy's a world traveler, a very experienced fighter, and he didn't really seem jazzed about fighting Thiago Santos. Like, well, give me big names, give me tough fighters, and you saw exactly why. It's because he's on a different level than most fighters competing in the UFC. He just is, he's so sharp. Mentally, he's at the top of his game. It really feels like he sees everything in slow motion. Nobody's ever done that to Thiago Santos. And this is the guy that they were talking about. He said that he accepted the fight with Daniel Cormier to fight for the light heavyweight championship, and for him to fight on the second fight of the night was very, very strange. But I have a feeling, I just get the sense that Gegard Mousasi in the next year or so will probably fight for a title.
Well, they're saying that Dan Henderson will be rematching Bisping for the title. Also, who would have guessed that was going to happen? But I agree with you, Mousasi and Bisping, that's a cool fight.
Super
That
cool.
is a very cool fight.
Last thought, just on John Jones, and now we've had a few days to look back at this. I mean, that was a huge part of this fight week, and just the amount of attention that got. I mean, this is a critical time in his career. He's about to turn 29 years old and facing the prospect of missing
2 years.
2 years on top of the fact he was out for 15 months in between the Cormier and St. Preux fights. I think that if he were to sit out for 2 years, I don't know if we'll ever see the potential realized, because it's so great with John Jones, and we may not have even seen the best one. To lose 2 years in your prime, I think he's robbed himself of hitting that true peak of his career.
And if this is the case, that he took something and it all comes out that he will be suspended for 2 years, yes, it's really unfortunate. It's terrible for the fans. It's terrible for the sport, because most people recognize John Jones as one of the top 3 or top 5, certainly best fighters to ever compete in the game. However, he's made a lot of money. Maybe he can just focus over the next 2 years, focus on development, whether it's the mental game, the physical game, and try to keep improving as a mixed martial artist, because people want to see him fight, and he's an amazing fighter. He just has to get the other areas of his life in order. And if this is real, we do have to remember this is a guy, he's an addict, and he just has an issue, and some people battle that their entire lives.
Yeah, I mean, can you imagine Wayne Gretzky or Michael Jordan or any of these guys in their prime failing a drug test and being suspended? I mean, you never really will know how good he could have been.
All right, that is going to wrap it up for us. He is Robin Black. He is John Ramdeen, and we will be back later this week. The prelims for Wednesday night's card from South Dakota will be airing here on Fight Network in Canada, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, leading into the main card, which is headlined by Michael McDonald and John Lineker.